Yeah, that's what I was doing. I was messing around, making it bigger, moving around. It's kind
Yeah, it's just like.
Oh my
I
lord.
mean, this is already like a character or something, and considering there's a bunch of shapes put together, I was just like, well, I could do that for abstract. Then I just added a few more arrays to make it look like there's crashing through this.
of, yeah.
I had a lot of fun. Of course, there's a few objects.
Morning, people online. So, standard operating procedure, when I get things rolling here and there's somebody live online, just give me a thumbs up that you can hear me. Everything's going well for the sake of it. Do I want to make sure that that's off? I do now.
AI is very good to give you ideas about what to do, you know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, I personally think it's totally pure, actually. It's a lot of fun.
One of my paintings I did 4 of these,
That looks really nice.
and they're about, there's one going like this. I got 4 of them, and I went out on this one website. It's an app. This one, this
Morning, everybody. How's it going? Good? Good. Everybody have a good weekend? Yeah? Yeah? All right. I did. Let's do names real quick. Again, Adrian. Help me out. Brianna. Alondra. No, you're okay. Because that happened, though, right? Like, I'm not imagining that. Right. There's Alondra on Wednesday, last Wednesday, and then you were sitting next to?
I was sitting over there, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Alejandra, Brianna, Adrian. We'll go with Adrian too. How's that? No, I'm kidding. That's fine. Adrian. Max, Sean, Kevin, Marcus, Mark?
Yes.
Mark, just Mark.
I mean, you can. My name is Marcus, but I go by Mark.
Okay. You want me to call you Mark?
Yes.
Okay. And backpack. All right. Okay. And cool. Okay, so we're picking up where we left off on Wednesday. Last week, we got everything rolling. Everybody's getting their stuff posted on Discord, which is great. Everybody's talking to each other on Discord, which is great. Let me just make sure this is up here. All right, Diana is on live stream, and she gave me a thumbs up that she can hear me. Most of the beginning of each class is me just making sure that it is indeed being streamed out to the world, and they are indeed getting the audio. And that all looks like it's happening, right? So it's kind of like teaching class and running a broadcast studio at the same time. A lot of, we're probably going to end up turning in a second version of this, this coming week, as well as we kind of like straddle a couple of weeks here because we just barely had time to scratch the surface on everything on Wednesday. So some of what we'll talk about today, you could apply to the thing that's due tomorrow night. But I'm not going to change the assignment. It's like it's posted what's due tomorrow night. But if you're still working on it and haven't turned it in yet, and you apply some of this, that's fine. But just keep that in mind. It'll be a little bit gray. Pun intended, this time, right? You get why that's a pun? The default gray cube, everything's gray all the time in Blender. Okay, all right, great. So let's look at a few things here. Another thing, that when I do this, for those of you interested, this is one of my favorite tools. This is called Zoom It. This was written, I don't know, seems like it was written like 50 years ago. It's like one of the like primordial Windows applications that happens to be, so good at its job. Anytime I do any sort of live presentation of any kind, this is the video game I'm best at, is running Zoom It. So the ability to, you can black out the screen, you can do what I do, where I draw a bunch of crap all over the screen constantly. But I mean, I'm trying to do this intentionally so that everybody can zoom in on the parts of the interface, which I think makes the video easier to parse in terms of like, I'm talking about this thing over here because, you know, I'm sending out 4K video, right? So 4K video, we're going to have almost 4,000 pixels across. And so if I'm not doing that, then the resolution of it makes it tough to really see what's happening on the screen, especially if you're only using one monitor. And then does everyone have a plan for what you're doing computer-wise for the semester? Right? If you're planning to borrow a computer from the school, you have submitted that request. If not, please do that, you know, yesterday. Because you know, I'll communicate with them this week. In the past, we have ran out of those. I was doing some research over the weekend. I'll try and post whatever recommendation I have for if you want to get a new computer. I mean, the rough recommendation is I got a computer over the break because mine had sort of reached the end of its life cycle. And yeah, I can recommend these because they come in a variety of price points. So even less expensive than this up to, you know, substantially more expensive. But Jen and I have bought HP computers for years now, and they've been rock solid. So more rock solid than most, which I liked. But the Victus is the thing you'd be looking at. The thing that's confusing here is, I've before explicitly recommended NVIDIA graphics cards, right? And so that holds true. But the confusing part is that there are, just real quick lay of the land here, there are two companies, for those of you who don't know this or don't do gaming, that make graphics card. The first one, you know, the gigantic one is NVIDIA. If you bought NVIDIA stock, you know, 4 years ago, congratulations. Like, you're probably not in this class at this point. You're just living on an island somewhere. And the other one is AMD. Those are pretty much it. So two companies that make GPUs, right? GPU stands for what? Graphics processing unit, right? Your computer has two brains, the GPU and the CPU. However, the confusing part is that AMD also makes CPUs. NVIDIA, you know, not really, not in the same way. So if you're interested in getting a new computer and whatnot, here, this in this particular case is the CPU and this is the GPU. You'd want to, you know, my advice would be like stick to something that has that configuration, or an Intel. I forget if all of these do or do not have that. But if you're a little unsure and you find something that works in your price point and you send me a link, I can look at it and be like, sure, that looks good. So, I've been using this one for about like a month and a half, and I thought it was nice. Not this exact one, but a similar one. And plenty useful. Okay, just to reiterate, as we're building our mental framing for what's going on here, we have our atomic level of three-dimensional representation, and that's points, also known as vertices or vertex or vertexes. I think vertices is the correct way. Edges and faces. And faces, you'll hear me say polygon occasionally, right? That's our fundamental, you know, that's our atomic level of things. The whole program is just manipulating those things. Above that, we have primitives. And a lot of what we did, these primitives all fall onto the object. I I think this is correct. All primitives in Blender would be objects, but perhaps not all objects would be primitives, as there's many other kinds of objects. But for the most part, right now, we're focusing on primitives, primitive shapes, right? And the important thing about primitive shapes to understand is right now we're working in, you can have a 3D version or you can have a 2D version, right? The 3D version of some sort of squarish thing would be a cube. The 2D version would be a square, right? So you can have 2D or 3D primitives. And then sort of climbing up the chain here of complexity, we have modifiers. And the modifier that we focused on last week very briefly was the array modifier, which allows you to make an array of primitives or an array of objects. And so climbing this ladder of complexity allows you to create more intricate programmatic arrays of objects, but you sort of sacrifice some of the atomic level of control as you go up the chain to some extent. So thinking about how that is organized while you're working on things. Great. Okay. Now, let's look at a few things. Let's save this file and just say something here, right? So working in a file that is untitled and unsaved is obviously unwise. And so we want to save as, and we'll come over here. If you're on the computers at school, they have a separate data drive here that is available. And we'll save that. And let's look over here. Yeah. So, does it crash a lot? Sometimes, yeah. Depending if you've wandered into a particularly unstable version, or if you've installed a series of add-ons that somehow don't agree with each other, that can happen a bunch. Also, I would say, especially with students in this class, the way that we work, it seems like we precipitate crashes at the end of our workflow when we come to rendering, which is frustrating and inconvenient. And so what can we do here? We can, first of all, make sure that autosave is on, and we can know what's happening here. And so when you save a file in Blender, it is some name. I try not to put spaces in my file names. Kind of a programming thing. I find it a little bit easier. .blend, right? It's a .blend file. Once you turn on autosave, autosave is going to automatically save your Blender file once you have saved it once. Okay, so if you haven't saved it all and you just opened Blender, started working away, and it crashed, that's not as good. We want to make sure that you start. That's the first thing you should do. You got something set up, you go ahead and save it. Once you have autosave on, then what's going to end up is it's going to save new versions of yours every X amount of minutes. You get to control how many minutes there. I think the default is 10. We'll look here. And it saves it like this. So the important part here is this at the end, the number. And so this is the version. When you see this in the file browser here, this won't look like a blend file. It will just look like my computer just gives it the blank icon, which just looks like a piece of paper or something. And so in order to recover a saved file, you need to remove the 1 there, or whatever the number is, and then your computer will recognize it as a blend file. If you double click on it, it will open up in Blender, right? And so this also starts the very, very, very beginning of our data redundancy strategies, where it's great to do a lot of good creative work. It's better to make sure that work is actually saved so you can actually show it to people later on. And so one of the primary strategies for data redundancy is versioning. And so autosave is a version of versioning. Versioning is just a nice word for saying not putting all your eggs in one basket, right? If you keep Control-S-ing all the time over the same file, it updates the same file name and essentially ejects the other data that was there before, right? Which is fine, right? It's better to Control-S than not to Control-S. That's a good principle. But it is even better to have multiple versions, because what's the downside is that file that you keep Control-S-ing, that one file every time, that can get corrupted. That does happen. And then if that's your only place it's saved, that's a problem, right? It's better to have multiple versions so that in the horrible event that your file does ever become corrupted, you can go back to the previous version of it. Will you lose some work in most situations? Yes. Will you not lose all of your work? Yes. That's way better, right? Especially the further and further and further you get into a project, right? Obviously, right? We don't want to have to redo a bunch of stuff over and over again. And so autosaving is versioning. And so if we looked at this here under Edit, Preferences, Save and Load, I believe these are the default settings. This is a pretty new installation of this, and I don't believe I've changed this. But if not, here, right, we have the autosave every 2 minutes, and then the save versions. It just has one there. Let's look in the folder. It should have done it by now. Yeah. So here's what I was talking about previously, right? And so here is the file, example space.blend, right? This, when I saved at the beginning, this is what I saved. And then here, this is the auto save backup, okay? And by default here, it is just doing 1. Is this the actual number? The number of old versions to maintain in the current directory. Yeah. What's this one? The maximum number of recently opened files. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't recommend opening 200 files simultaneously in Blender. That doesn't seem like a great idea. And so here, this is the how far back in history do you want to be able to reach? And so this, in computer vocabulary, this is a queue, right? So first in, or in the UK, this is the word for standing in line, right? So as you, if it's auto saving every 2 minutes, right, and you're working for an hour, that would mean you would make 30 files, right? This, you can see how this would balloon out of control, right? And so it does keep a queue here, sort of a first in, last out queue is the name here, right? So we have, yeah, it's amazing when you try to think of metaphors for these simple things, how like you're like, well, what could it be? We have a tube, right? And we're shoving stuff into this tube, and you, like, let's say it's like socks, and you push like the first pair of socks in there, then you push the next one, then you push the next one. And as you're pushing them into the top, they're moving further down to the bottom. And let's say the tube is long enough to hold 5 pairs of socks, right? And as soon as you push the 6th one in, the first one you pushed goes out the bottom, right? That's a first in, last out queue. And so that's what this is, meaning that it'll save the most recent 2 versions of it and then automatically delete the ones before that. So yeah, 2 here is a little large. I might go, or a little small. I would say 5 is a, perfectly reasonable amount of versions to have under most circumstances. So that's good. Okay. And timer, 2 minutes. Yeah, that's fine. Good. So incredibly important here as we start to do more, better, fun, interesting things, right? Again, you want to be able to save said work. Yes?
Where's the path to, if I want to direct it to a different folder?
You mean the autosaves to a different folder?
An external drive, the autosave to an external drive.
Yeah, it's going to automatically autosave to wherever you saved the file. So, like save, like it puts it in the same directory as the file, right? So save your file to the external drive, then all of the other files will go over there as well. Okay. And yeah, I wouldn't put the backups in a different place for now, like just for the sake of simplicity. Does that make sense for everybody? Right. So that this will go a long way to making sure you save your work. Okay, great. All right, we talked a lot about the 2D, 3D paradigm that we're working in. We're making ostensibly 3-dimensional stuff using 2-dimensional tools, and how that requires us to often use these kind of views in order to see what's happening, right? And so anybody remember when this icon is in this mode, what is the name for this kind of a view where we're just seeing a 2-dimensional slice? The isometric is going to be a subset of, what was the second one you said?
Is it perspective?
That's the other one.
Flat. Is it ortho?
Orthographic. There we go.
Orthopedic is what I need.
Yeah, like a two-dimensional traction device. That's an orthographic, orthopedic, medical something. Yeah. Orthographic. Yeah. Write it down this time. Right. If I said it twice, you should know it. Orthographic. Isometric, as far as I know, is more like a subset of orthographic.
It's like a 3/4 like angled view kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely how it's used conversationally. As far as like what the exact, what makes something totally, what the mathematical discussion is for that. But yeah, like, I mean, in terms of isometric games and stuff, like that's definitely the conversational definition of it. Orthographic, right? And then when I come out of this, if I just press the middle scroll wheel and start looking around here, now when it's like this, that's right. This is perspective view, right? This is the easy one because this is how we experience the world. And for most of what we do here, certainly at the beginning, we're creating something that we want to present in perspective. But we're using orthographic views to construct those things because they can be more precise than trying to move stuff around in perspective because we have 2-dimensional tools that we're using to make 3-dimensional stuff, right? But that's not always the case. You can use these tools to make flat stuff, 2-dimensional things, right? You ultimately have control over what gets spit out of the program. And so, like, any view you can manifest in the viewport is something that you could conceivably render. So, so there's that. Cool. Okay. So as long as you wrap your mind around those things, it makes the viewport easier to use. And then, yeah, the shortcuts for accessing all of those things here are super useful. All of our numpad stuff over here And then I did go over the numpad situation for laptops last time. Yes. If you're on a laptop and you want to use the numbers, come over here to Preferences, Input, and check this box. That means that the numbers along the top of your keyboard will do what the numpad numbers do by default. Okay, great. And everyone also thought about their mouse situation, and you have some kind of mouse to use on a regular basis. It just makes it much, much easier to do all of this stuff. Great. Let's move on to something related to the two-dimensional, three-dimensional issue here is the space in which we're working. And up here are transformation, orientation, so the transformation here, or the axis, or the gizmo, right, the red, green, and blue arrows that appear when we click on something. What direction are those facing? Being able to change this orientation of those arrows makes it easier to accomplish a lot of placement tasks in Blender. So here, for instance, I've got my default cube, and I came over here and I turned on my gizmos so that this is here, and I don't need to force myself to remember the shortcuts for right now. I can just manipulate it directly, which I think is very useful, especially here at the beginning. And as I move this around, even though I'm in perspective view, I'm clicking on one axis to move it. And so this, I would say, is still a precise way of moving it because I'm just moving it on one axis, right? As opposed to just hitting the G key and moving it around totally ad hoc. We talked about this before. This is imprecise because it's three-dimensional movement using a two-dimensional tool. But let's say I rotate this cube some way. So I just pressed R and rotated it in a pretty ad hoc way. But even though I rotated it, the gizmo itself is still oriented in what's called global space. The arrow, blue arrow, and what arrow is the blue arrow?
Z.
Z. All right, Mark, you're good. So when you're good, you get banned from answering any more questions, so that I can force everyone else to answer questions. It's a way of my way of continually applying pressure to the rest of the class. So, Mark, you've been banned for this class. The bans are lifted in the next class.
In the switch, you just push the letter? Like if I want to spin it on the Y, just push Y, right?
You would press R, then Y.
R, then Y.
Yeah. So those transform shortcuts are the tool, then the axis. So we're in global space here. So I spun the cube in this just random way, but the gizmo still faces that direction. This is fine, and this is preferred if I wanted the cube at some sort of strange angle, then I want to move it straight up as if to put it on top of something, right? And that's easy because this is facing straight up. However, what if I wanted the cube to move relative to the cube this way, right? Like sort of in the direction that face is facing. I'll get to you in a second. Then up here, I would change from global to local. Now, the axis itself is oriented in it's facing in the orientation of the object. And so now I could move this along the z-axis according to this object, right? And so this, just switching this, doesn't do anything to the stuff. This is just changing the orientation of the tool so that then you can use the tool differently, okay? The other ones there we can get into, but far and away, the two I'm using most are these two, going back and forth between global and local, right? They both have really, you need to be able to understand both of those spaces, right? And this is the key to starting to open up some of the ideas of parent-child relationships in Blender. Yes, Sean.
You said if you press this key, it'll move the blue one.
So let's say I wanted to move this in the Z direction. I press G, then Z, and then I'm moving it along here, right? And so, yeah, it's if you want to use the shortcuts for transform, it's going to be the tool, right? And that's going to be G, R, or S. And then you want to constrain it to an axis because you're smart and you've listened to what I've been telling you over the last 2 class periods and know that just you moving it in all 3 dimensions is a fool's game, right? You're a 3-dimensional person, right? But it's a smart 3-dimensional person who knows that they need to use 2-dimensional tools to manipulate something in a perspective 3-dimensional environment. And so then you press the axis that you want to constrain it to, which is going to be X, Y, or Z, those tools as they are. Right, so it's a 2-step thing. I'm trying to think. That's the most, as far off the top of my head, in terms of like a 2-step shortcut situation. And so, the other thing down here, allow me to call your attention to this, is that when I press G to move it into the grab tool here, at the bottom, you'll see that Blender then throws up the modifiers that you could press next, right? And so this is in the tiny little bottom part of the interface there, right? And so you could use the axes or shift and then those for the plane, right? So that little that fat arrow right there, that's the shift key. Or you could use control or snap. Yeah, I mean, I don't use a whole bunch of the other stuff on a regular basis, but there's a bunch of things like enter the tool, then press something else for the modifier, right? But again, here at the beginning, if the shortcuts are easy to remember and they're coming easy, okay. If you've already done Blender before and you've got some shortcuts under your hands, great, use them. But learning the program is not about memorizing all the shortcuts, right? It's really much more important to conceptually understand what you want to have happen and what you're looking at, and then to make it happen faster over and over and over again, knowing the shortcuts, that helps, right? So have your page in your notebook of shortcuts that you're compiling, but trying to start off and do everything with shortcuts from the very, very get-go is not, what I would recommend. It just provides a lot. It's just a whole additional level of friction you need to overcome there, right? You've got to have your basic level of understanding, then you've got to translate that into shortcuts, right? And those days are numbered, right? Like we're getting close to the point where this, right? I mean, I hope like we're less than 10 years away from this being like, so at home I'm holding up the keyboard, this going away, right? Or rather this will be another screen, right? There's already a lot of machinery like this, right? Because memorizing these shortcuts for these tools is really, it was the only way to do it, right? It would make way more sense, and the people are starting to do this, right? If I click on this, and then, if this were a screen, it could reconfigure itself as you're working, right? And so if I select the cube, then I immediately get buttons that say things like constrain to X, constrain to Y, constrain to Z. And so I'm no longer having to do this additional level of completely arbitrary translation from command into some random key on the keyboard, right? And so, that there's versions of that exist right now. They're trying to do that on the screen, right, when the interface reconfigures itself as you're working. And then hopefully we're really close to having something like that be ubiquitous. All right, there's already laptops where you open them up and like both parts are screen. It's just that this screen here is touch sensitive, and so you can type on it. Now, yeah, it does feel like garbage to type on something that doesn't have buttons, but you know, I don't know. People are working on it. So yeah, local versus global, right? Because if you stayed in global and you wanted to move this in that direction, you know, you're doing something like, okay, well, I'm going to move it up, I'm going to move it over. Okay, now I got to move it this way and then up and then, right? This is obviously not the way to do it, right? Switch to here, and then you're able to move this along this axis as you would see fit there. So that makes it a lot easier to use. Yeah. The other thing to keep in mind here, things happen. I've messed stuff up. Alt-G. So Alt, this is different than what we were just talking about where you press G and then a modifier. Alt plus R, G, S will reset the rotation, movement, or position and scale. And so that's super useful to bring it back to the origin, right? And so the origin is a very special location in space. What are the coordinates of the origin? 0, 0, 0, right? For the position, and then zeroing out rotation would be 0 degrees, 0 degrees, 0 degrees. And then scale, zeroing out scale is going to bring us back to 1, 1, 1. I'll expand on that in a moment. So Alt-G, Alt-R, there we go. Now I'm back to ground truth. This is really important, especially here at the beginning, build at the origin. So you've got some idea for your abstract thing about like a relatively complex structure you want to build and then build something else from that structure or move it somewhere. My advice, especially here at the beginning, would be to construct that structure at the origin, then move it somewhere else. Versus trying to build some sort of multi-part thing somewhere out in space. It becomes, it's easier, certainly here at the beginning, to sort of do it in the middle and then move it to where you would want, right? Sort of space station style construction, right? They don't build the space station in space, they build the capsules on the ground, then they put it up in space and attach it to the space station. Great. Okay, so with that in mind, one other thing to keep in, let's look up here. Other transform things. So the snap, the little magnet, which is useful. As soon as I turn that on and press G, now you see it's snapping to the grid, which can be useful, for all of our things. If I want to be much more precise about setting up some kind of very intricately spaced something or other, like so. This allows me to do that, sort of snapping all of these into place. And then this is a toggle, right? So now it is on, and if I turn this off, now it's off. It doesn't unsnap them. It's just that now if I were to move these together, they would all, they're still maintain their original spacing there. Good. Okay. So with that in mind, over here, the transformation pivot point. This is somewhere where Blender does differ from some of the other 3D programs in that Blender has this 3D cursor. And this thing here with the red and white stripes on the circle, this is the cursor. And yeah, I didn't learn with this, so I tend to not use the cursor at all. And I leave this in median point, meaning it's going to be the anchor point for whatever it is that I currently have selected, right? And so if I move this cube, the axis stays in the middle of the cube, and this is the 3D cursor. So you'll find some people who use Blender, especially if you watch tutorials online, where they're using the 3D cursor a lot, like they put the cursor somewhere and then they move stuff to the cursor. I don't know. It always struck me as like extra steps, and it's just not the way I mentally frame doing things. It just seems like an extra level of unnecessary abstraction in most cases. So there's that. But just to be aware of that. And then certainly if you inadvertently change the setting like to this, and then you're there, now if I were to rotate this, you see it's rotating around the cursor and not around the actual center point of the object. And certainly most of the time here at the beginning, when they press R, students are going to want to have this happen, not this. Okay, there's a place for this, but we'll talk about different ways to set that up later. But yeah, so I usually have this in median point there, so that's there. But just be aware, that's what this is, and certainly most of the time when I'm working, you'll see it just hanging out here at the origin. I'm not using this in most instances that I can think of at this point, right? But yeah, be aware that, like, as far, I mean, Cine 4D didn't really have a similar sort of object. So yeah, all of these over here, changing all of these settings doesn't actually manipulate the things. It just changes the way the manipulators are going to function when you actually do use a tool to do something to the objects. We don't need to worry about that one for right now. If you want to change the snapping stuff here, yeah, so this is useful. I'm going to Alt-G this back here, and I want to put some stuff on other stuff. So in terms of, I want to directly place things on other things. So I'm going to Shift-A here and make a sphere. There we go. And let's move this over. And I'm going to hit S and scale it down. There we go. Okay, so great. Now I want to put this on here. And so one useful setting here under Snap is that let's change it to Face and Face Project. And so if I go here and here, now if I were to use G and move this and turn the tool on and set this to rotation, Face Project. There we go. It's kind of hard to see, but now it is constraining. I'm moving this along the surface of the cube. Here, let me rotate the whole view a little bit, right? And so when I'm just out here and just hit G, it's just, again, arbitrarily moving it in three-dimensional space. But now when I move it over the cube, from the perspective that I'm looking at it, it is projecting it onto the surface of the cube, right? So I have this here and just hit Shift-D. Now I'm moving these with the mouse quickly, but they all are directly on the surface of the cube. Now, you notice that this one's a little bit off. Why would that be the case? The surface of the cube is flat. It's because it's projecting it on to the first thing that it hits So there's the camera, right, in the scene, but then there's this other, first-person camera, the viewport camera, that we never really, see outside of it. It's the view from which we're looking at the scene. And so in this case, once I have this set to face project, then maybe this will be a little bit more obvious. I make a cube. So here, and then scale this down, and then G. There we go. And so now you can see it do like this. Why is half of it inside? Because the face project is functioning based on the anchor point of the object as it currently exists, and the default anchor point for the primitive is the center of it. And so now if I were to Shift D again to duplicate this, you can see I'm putting these directly on top of that. But it is being projected onto whatever it hits in space. And so this is this concept will come up again and again. We have this camera that we're looking through, and imagine shooting a laser beam out of that camera, and the first thing that the laser beam hits is sort of where the object gets placed in this mode. This concept comes up for rendering in terms of when it comes time to render. If you have certain rendering modes, this is kind of like how the camera is going to understand light, is that instead of thinking about the light sources, it's actually thinking about shooting stuff out of the camera, and then what does the camera actually see? And so this idea of shooting a ray out of the camera in video games, this is another idea where what is actually in front of me? We're going to shoot this ray, and the first thing that the ray hits is what we're actually working with there. So for instance, if we were to visualize this, let's look at the camera in the scene. And so here, if I were to select the camera, cube, let's do this. And now we'll just do it this way. All right, so the camera here, I'm going to Alt-G the camera, Alt-R. And so there's the camera. And yeah, you can conceptualize this as like this beam that's being shot out of the camera like so. And the first thing that it hits is where the object gets placed over there. Like this. You'll hear me refer to this often. When the camera is visualized here, the camera is just a point in space. And so this pyramid-like shape, this is the frustum, which is not a part of a real camera. It's the name for this visualization of the camera view in 3D. All right, so in terms of the program, it helps to have this concept of a camera, but it's really just a point in space from which we're looking at the scene. And then there's a bunch of real world camera stuff applied to that. How many of you have taken photography? Yeah, so the good news is things are a little bit different, but they in general try to construct the programs so that the camera has settings that for the most part work like real world cameras. And so if you've got some real world camera or cinematography knowledge, then that can transfer a little more easily here to the virtual camera.
So you can't get those out of there then, right? They're stuck to that cube, right?
No, they're not stuck at all. That's a good point. So if I grab this and move it, there, right? And so it's just this tool here is just about the placement of the object you're manipulating. This magnet does not mean that you have magnetized the object to the other object. That's a separate issue, which we'll get to in a minute. But this is all of this stuff up here, just about how the tool you're currently using is working. Nothing about changing the object's relationship to another object in the scene. Right. So good point. If I wanted to manipulate all these things at the same time, we'll get to some other issues, but if we select them all like this and then move them around, that works. The issue here, yeah, this opens up a good one as we move our way across the top of the interface, is that, yeah, if I wanted, I made this, whatever this is, and so now I followed my own advice and constructed it at the origin. How do I move it somewhere else? One way to do that would be to select it all and then hit G, and now I can move it somewhere else, okay? That works if I just needed to move it once. If I wanted to establish some sort of permanent relationship between these things, that's not going to be great. Also, notice that if I do this and then hit G, let's see. There we go. It's very easy to end up in a situation where I thought I was getting all the stuff and I didn't get all of the stuff to select here. And so with that in mind, let's look at this. And so this is how we're currently viewing the scene over here. And so we have our different modes. By default, we are in what's called viewport shading. Okay, so viewport shading, solid shading here. Viewport shading solid. What do we need to know about this? This is fast. So if you have a heavy scene and you want to be able to work with it quickly, it's better to be in solid view or perhaps wireframe view. It's going to be much less work to present it to you, but this is not how it's going to look when you actually output or render it. And then if you look at the options here, or not the options, this guy, yeah. So this little handle, this is going to show you some of the options depending on this view. And so here, there's some different ways to look at this. This is not actually changing the colors of the object. This is just sort of changing our way that we're looking at them right now. Some of them, you'll turn them on, you're like, ooh, that looks nice. There's like lighting and reflections and stuff happening here, which is something to, a perfectly reasonable thing to think, but you would be wrong. It's not real lighting or reflections. This is all fake lighting and reflections. They look great, but like they're not actual reflections. Like things are not going to actually be reflected. It's just another way to calculate these things, which happens quickly. So here, yeah, under matte cap, there's a bunch of different ways of looking at things. I like this one a lot. Just when I'm working, a lot of people are like, ooh, rainbow colors. And this is actually showing you the normal angle of the face, which we can get to here in a while. But yeah, this is the solid shading. The thing about this is that it's solid, and number one, I would say, is you can change the way that you're looking at it quickly here. And then number two is that because it is solid, it does create this visual obstruction, which can change the way that objects are selected, right? It can make it more difficult to select through things. So one way, the easiest way to sort of make sure that you're selecting through things is the next viewport, next view mode over to the left. This is wireframe, right? So wireframe, this is the fastest way to look at anything, in that we're not rendering anything except, the edges of the object here. And so now, because everything is, see-through, you can select through things by default. There's also this X-ray setting, which you can set here as well to be able to see through things in the solid view. So this menu here changes depending on which mode, viewport shading mode that you're in. It's important to realize that. There's a bunch of, yeah, I mean, all the programs are like this. The menus are contextual, right? The options it's showing you change depending on the context of the current state of the program. So sometimes they do a better job of making that obvious, but in this case, yeah, this tiny little caret over here, all of the stuff that appears in this window changes depending on which of the modes that you're in, right? And so, yeah, now I could easily select through the object like so, because the X-ray setting is on by default in wireframe. So again, especially at the beginning here, if you're working on your computer situation and you've loaded something, you've created something with a lot of stuff and you're having a hard time working, staying in solid or wireframe is going to make it easier to work with. The other two here, this next one is material preview. And if I turn that on here, you'll see that things look a little bit better. We have this shadowing, what looks like better shadowing happening than what was before. We're going to punt on this one, right? We'll come back to this. This mode has some relevance, but for right now, the one that's most important is over here at the end. This is render preview. And so this is going to show us what we would actually output. And so if I change it to this one, watch what happens. Okay, now it's back to gray, and here's the light in the scene. And so now if I grab this light and start moving it around, we are in render preview mode. So all of the rendering stuff, right? So the cameras, the lights, all of that, we're actually seeing the result of. If I put this back here, let's turn off the X-ray. There we go. So here, if I grab this, by default, here I am in solid view moving the light around. See how nothing is happening? Everybody with me here? By default, I don't see the light, right? Because that's not what solid view is for. Solid view is for the construction, the building, the shaping of the shape, the extruding of the polygons, the managing the faces, the edges, the points, all that kind of stuff, right? Solid view is not the view that you're in when it's time to like, okay, I've got a form I like. Now I want to make an interesting, dynamic, beautiful image. Then you switch to render view. And now all of the stuff matters. The light, but also the camera. If I move the camera over here, right? And so all of this matters now. I can make a duplicate light, and now I have two lights. See how I have two shadows happening over there? I could make some other lights. I could tint these lights. I'm just throwing out some stuff here. And you see how all of this matters now. We get this like nice change in lighting over the surface of the object because I've got this one red light and a couple other lights, and I've got, multiple shadows. So if I come back over here, that's gone. Okay, it's not deleted. It's just the computer is not doing the work to show me that, because it can be a lot of work at that point. Okay, and so this is, we'll step towards this now. What is our workflow here? Modeling, make shapes, then lighting and camera, and then render. And so up here, my general advice would be that you should be in solid or wireframe while you're making the shapes. Then when it comes time to work on the lighting and the camera, you would switch to render preview mode. That way you can see all of that stuff. And then this is actually what gets rendered, right? And when you're rendering, right, the word render, you know, if I draw something on a piece of paper, that's rendering. But in our context, when I mention it in this class, is essentially make the final pixels, right? Because in our instance, when we're making computer graphics, that's our end goal, right? Some grid of pixels, either a single grid, a still image that gets shown on screen, or a series of grids, a movie that gets shown on screen, right? All of these are tools to make that at the end of the day. So yeah, understanding the viewport modes here, right? So this is why change the viewport modes? Why not just have it look like this all the time? Because this looks good. It's because this is new for students who haven't done 3D before. When you work in Photoshop, Photoshop doesn't have, for the most part, this level of abstraction. When you're working in Photoshop, as you're manipulating things on the canvas, what you see in the Photoshop file is what you get when you save the file or when you output it, right? And so you hear me use this term a lot. WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get, right? A lot of you who haven't done computer graphic stuff, 3D stuff before, you're used to working in programs that are essentially WYSIWYG, right? When you draw stuff in Illustrator, the way that you're drawing it is the way it's going to output, right? And that makes sense. That's the best way to work, right? You don't want this additional layer of abstraction between like, I'm doing a thing and it looks like this and it's going to look different when I output it. Like, why do that? Why have this additional layer of abstraction there? It's because this kind of work throughout the history of computer graphics has been at the threshold of what computers are capable of. It's been just a continual historic moving of the goalposts, right? When they make the first computers that have, I don't know, like 100K memory or something like that, right? I have like, I don't know, 1 billion times more memory than that on my phone or something like that at this point. They had to do this kind of thing because you simply couldn't look at the end product while you were working on it, right? And so this is not totally the case anymore, right? We're able to actually get a good render preview for most scenes in Blender, right? Things that are not going to be hyper complicated or hyper dense. And so over the course of computer graphics here, we have this separation where there's the content and then the stylization or sort of visual presentation of that content. For those of you who have done any sort of web design, right? What is the fundamental language of the content of the web, right? When you write a web page, what language is that in? What does HTML stand for? Hypertext Markup Language, right? So HTML is the content of the web. Content meaning like, this is a sentence. The words, this is a sentence, right, are essentially what's encoded in HTML. But there's a second language on top of it, CSS, Cascading Style Sheets. And that controls the stylization, the way that information is presented. And this is a similar sort of paradigm where this stuff, the points, the edges, the faces, are the fundamental shapes. And then the way that those are lit, the way that those are colored, and the way that they are viewed is a separate step in the process. And so ideally, things go in this direction, right? You model a bunch of stuff, you make it look pretty, you render it out, you send it to your client, you get paid. That's how it's supposed to go, right? But it doesn't. The knowing how to look at the stuff while you're working on it in terms of working faster and working more efficiently, because a lot of times it's supposed to go like this, but it goes, like this, where you're going back and forth between these things as you're trying to make something, right? Good. All right, I did a good job there. Is that clear? I think that's really clear, right? I just, spelled it out and then scribbled all over it. Right, I'm working, I'm figuring out what my shape is, and then I come over here and I start to think about the lighting, right? Because this is what we're doing here, this is a, contemporary meta artistic practice, right? Before computers, these were all like separate people, right? You have your sculptor or your blacksmith making a thing, and then someone else has to photograph that thing. Someone else has to come in and light that thing. You're doing all those jobs, right? The computer allows for that level of, that scale of doing that kind of work, but it really does help to think about yourself putting different hats on and off as you're working on this, right? Now I'm a cinematographer. Now I'm the modeler. Now I'm the producer and the person who yells at me to get it done faster and for less money, right? So all of those things as you're working, the program's kind of designed, all the programs are designed with that in mind. Like now I'm in this mode, right? That's a little bit of what's happening up here with all of these different views, right? All of these tools are always there in Blender, but you're kind of setting it up where like, okay, I'm going to go into sculpting mode. Let's get all my sculpting tools out on the table and then go to town, right? And then I can come back over here and do other stuff. So switching modes, switching hats, switching mental models of what you're doing here while you're working. So it may be tempting, and I'll certainly do it from time to time, to just stay in render view, right? Because it looks good, right? Why not just look at the thing? And it also takes away that level of abstraction, and that this here camera, and then I press F12 to render this. There we go. This looks exactly like that. And so now I've set up my own WYSIWYG situation. Here, for the first 2 months, that'll be fine. We're not going to do anything so heavy. Although in this one, yeah, you could possibly get into trouble depending, if you start to figure out the way that you could make many objects at the same time, you could certainly start to create something that's a heavier lift for the computer. What is my overall point here? Working without this level of abstraction is generally great. If you stay in render mode, that's what you're doing. But the problem is it just becomes, at some point you'll hit this. WYSIWYG becomes too slow, in which case then you need to manage your other modes in order to work quickly, then render. So keep that in mind. But the idea that we're stepping away from WYSIWYG, for those of you who have never done any computer programming, or those of you who have never done any web design, or those of you who haven't done this kind of work before, this will be new, right? Because WYSIWYG is obviously the way you would want most things to work. It's the way the real world works to some extent. So keep that in mind. So what did I just do here at the end? We'll get to this in a second, but just for a very quick preview, I pressed F12. So this is a big one. Render. This means actually draw the frame, the grid of pixels that we're going to have rendered here. The thing that usually gets people here at the beginning is that by default, Blender is going to show you the view of the camera, which is not necessarily the way you've been looking at it in the viewport. And so this ends up being a pain point for new users here. And so how do we look through the camera? 0 on the numpad. This is one of the most important ones. Look through the camera, and then inevitably you'll look through the camera and decide like, oh, that's not where I want the camera to be, right? And so the next most important shortcut here is Control-Alt-0, which is move camera to current view. Those are two shortcuts I'm using, just constantly throughout working with the program. Because those of you who have done any, building of real world experiences, set design of any kind, you're building this thing, but the view at which it's being looked at, the audience view of the thing, is incredibly critical to the construction of the thing, right? You don't want to waste time making a bunch of junk that no one is going to ever see, right? And so that does hold true somewhat for us, right? Especially if we're making a still, that's 100% true. If you're making a movie, it may or may not be true, right? Depends on the camera movement. Maybe the camera moves the whole way around a thing, in which case, obviously, you need to make sure the thing looks correct from all angles, right? Or perhaps it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then again, you don't need to waste time making sure the backside looks good if no one is ever going to see the backside of it, right? So this is another area where I see new users get hung up, is that because this is a three-dimensional environment which is intentionally designed to simulate the real world, it's like, well, I'll just make it exactly like it is, or I'll make it exactly as how they make it in the real world. That information is useful, but often, in the majority of cases, trying to totally reconstruct something as it exists in the real world often results in either way too much work or way too much detail that is just unnecessary in order to create the final image, right? In some cases, we're not creating the final image. We're going to 3D print this thing, right? And so there may be some of this, in that context, some of this is less true. However, when we're 3D printing it, the 3D printing of an object is really layers of two-dimensional slices. And so some of this does hold true. Like the Blender three-dimensional shapes do not 100% transfer to 3D printing without taking care of a bunch of other issues there. So these two, if I took time to memorize any shortcuts, these would be the two I would definitely get in my fingers at this point. So 0 to look through the camera, and then Control-Alt-0 to move the camera to that view, right? So how do I know when I'm looking through the camera? Blender will show you the frame here. And so this is also a little bit confusing, is that, inside this box, that's what we're rendering. You'll see it will go away as soon as I start orbiting around again, right? So let's say I decide I want to look at it here. And so if I want this to be my camera view, what you should not do is come over to the camera and then start moving the camera around like this to try and get, it's really a tough way to do this. What you should do is sort of find the view that you want here, and then Control-Alt-0 and bring, now the camera has snapped to this view. I can go back to work doing stuff, and then if I want to check in again with what is over here, if I press F, it opens up the render view there. Okay, yeah, that's what I've got there. So a lot of times when students start off here, they'll have something like this, right? And they're doing all their work over here, and then they're like, this looks awesome, I can't wait to see the render, and they'll render it out, and then they get that, and they're like, it's not, like, your camera is off somewhere else, and it's not pointed at whatever it is that you've made there. So that Control-Alt-0, 0, super, super useful. Let's do it again here. Okay, I think so for right now, most of your time is probably going to be here and here, right? I would use this while I'm working to build stuff, and this when it comes time to add some lights and some camera, move the camera around. go ahead, look at your notes. Any questions about what I just spewed out here over the last hour? Yes.
I have a question, but it's not from something you covered today. Last week, you had like an object, and then you made it to where it like multiplied itself into a big circle and made it big and small. Can you show us how to do that?
Yeah, I'm working towards that again. That was the array modifier, and we're getting there then. Yeah, I just totally like threw that in at the end. So we'll discuss that in more detail today. Yeah. Good question. Other questions?
I do have a question.
Yes.
I know the Shift A is to add a light, but you have the light as a default in your in the outliner menu. I don't have the light in your actual outliner menu. You don't there. So when I add light, I'm still not getting anything in the render. It shows nothing in the render unless I add sun.
Are you in this mode?
Yeah.
The lights only go so far, so they could either be not close enough or not bright enough.
So I don't have the green icon until I add a light. Is that correct?
Which icon? This one here?
Uh-huh.
This shows up when you select the light, right? So yeah, you have to add it first,
Okay.
then you have to click on it, and yeah. So this one here, what is this technically? Yeah, so this is the data tab. And so this is showing you the object data, which is going to shift depending on what kind of object it is, right? Because when I select the camera, you'll see that thing turns into a tiny little camera there, and then I have all the camera options, right? So this changes, like when I select this, it's a mesh, and shows me all the data stuff for that mesh.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So in order to see that icon, you actually have to add the light, and then you click on light. Okay.
Right, yeah, 2 steps there. Add the light, then click on light, yes. When you select a bunch of things, yeah, it has the thing I selected most recently there. Okay, anyway. Good. All right. Let's take a deep breath here and also discuss something from the assignment. So the one screen grab I added there was about the add-ons. So again, back to the preferences menu. I try not to live over here, but it's important to get a few things configured at the beginning in order to work well. So in here, under add-ons, one of the ways you can have yours configured like mine is to look at that list of ones that I put on the assignment. And you can search for them here and then just simply enable them with the checkbox. So the ones that I have in the assignment here, right? These would be good ones to get enabled here. We're not using them all right now, but these are definitely like default ones I usually have on. And so this is all has to do with, we have, let's close this. Did I close that window? Dang it. You have, download Blender, vanilla Blender, and then you can, which is the core program, and then you can increase the functionality of the core program with 2 categories of things. Add-ons. Add-ons are already there. You just check box. The extension is structurally the same as an add-on. It adds some kind of functionality to Blender, except you download these. And they can come from either the Blender, I don't know what the official name is. Was it the Blender Extension Database or something to that effect? Or anywhere else. You can get them from GitHub. There's a Blender marketplace where people sell extensions of different kinds, right? Also be aware that the first time you try to put extensions in, you'll get a pop-up and Blender will say, hey, I'm going to connect to the internet. Is that cool? And yes, it's cool, right? It's just going out to grab whatever the extension is. That's all you're agreeing to there. And it'll only happen the first time you install it. So be aware of that. Okay. I don't think that most of what we're doing today, any of what we're doing today, is particularly dependent on an extension, but it'd be good to get those in there. It's important to understand what the lay of the land is here, right? Most modern programs are like this now. There's some sort of core, and then you get to add more stuff in order to extend the functionality of said program. Yes?
So I'm in preferences add-on.
Yeah.
And how do you find more of them? Because I'm typing in the search bar on the top and it's not popping up. The one I'm looking for specifically.
Yeah, so if it's not popping up there, it may be an extension, right? So try searching for it over here in the extensions set. What did I put in that image?
Loop tools was the one I was looking for specifically.
Yeah, let's see here. Well, it comes up there. I'm in 5.
It is on the good extensions one.
And it doesn't show up if you type loop into add-ons?
Not on the add-ons, but I went to get extensions and I typed it and it was right there. So maybe you have to get them from the extensions page to put it on the add-ons. I don't know.
Yeah, that's weird. I'm not sure. I mean, that if anybody has the same thing that's happening with Sean there, let me know. I'm not totally certain. This whole structure, this is relatively new in that I try to remember what it was before. Everything was an extension or everything was an add-on, but some of the add-ons were local and some of the add-ons weren't, something like that. And then they just recently changed it. So yeah, we'll file this under the good news is they're improving Blender. The bad news is they're improving Blender, right? But as long as you got loop tools there somehow. So
Yep.
At the end of the day, that's what you want. Okay. And again, you'll get that alert the first time you connect to the internet through Blender, and that should be fine. Okay, everybody looking through their notes there. Everybody, any questions as you're looking through your notes? Where are we at? 10? All right. Let's talk about multiple objects at the same time. So all the stuff we did before when I was placing things on the surface, as I demonstrated when Kevin asked that question, it doesn't associate them with each other. If I move the core thing, the other ones don't come along. So there's a few things we can do here. We can parent one object to another. We can join objects, or we can put multiple objects in a collection. Okay, if we parent them here, the way I like to do this is that you shift drag the child onto the parent. Here, when you do this, they will remain separate objects, but the child transforms with parent. So anytime you make a more complex animated thing, a tank, right? So if you had a tank, the turret of the tank would almost always be a child of the body of the tank, right? And so this is most often used when you want to animate individual objects as part of a whole. Another option here is to join. And so this is Control J with objects selected. And this essentially joins multiple objects into single object. The important thing to understand here is this does not change the geometry. It simply just takes all the geometry and puts it in one object. I'll demonstrate here in a minute. And then a collection. The collection is going to be more for grouping objects. This is more for your more for scene organization, organizing the scene, putting a bunch of things that you're going to classify of the same category together in terms of being able to organize them, not in space, just organize the outliner. Because even with me just freewheeling it there, you saw how cluttered the outliner became, right? It's just like a very arbitrary list of objects and lights and cameras and junk as I just shift D my way to chaos, right? So these three tools, I think, are primary ways to frame working with multiple objects here, right? So parenting, do I want the individual objects to animate but function together? Like the tank, right? Where the turret needs to move with the tank, but you need to rotate separately. So for this week's assignment, we're not putting keyframes on anything. So the parenting here, I'll show it to you now, but we'll explore this further later. Joining allows us to take multiple objects and join them together into a single object, okay? And then they are all under one thing, but it does not melt them together. It doesn't melt the vertices together. They still remain separate, which I'll demonstrate here in a second. And then we have a collection, which is really just, like a drawer to put stuff in. Cool. Okay, so I've got all of this stuff here. And so this, let's see here, I'll go ahead and join these objects. And so I'll make sure that I'm only selecting these and not selecting the lights or the cameras. And so I could either do that here. I want to make sure I'm getting all of the objects, so I'll switch to this view to make sure I'm selecting through the scene and I'm not getting those objects. I could also come over here and shift select, hold down control and select them all that way. I don't usually do that, but you could do that. And so now they're all selected. Mark was very smartly explaining to people the difference in the orange highlights in Blender. This ends up becoming important throughout using the program, and you should start to pay attention to this. In that, in Blender, once you start selecting multiple things, the last thing you selected matters. It changes the functionality of some of the tools, and so you need to start to pay attention to that in terms of, like, these are the darker orange things, then this is the last thing that was selected over there. So keep all of that in mind. Good. Okay, so I've got all these things, and now I Control J, and boom. They are all in here now. Okay, remember the object over here is not, it's just a container for points, edges, and faces. Just because something is an object does not mean the faces need to be connected in some way, that they need to share. None of that is a requirement for an object. An object is just simply a blank organization within the program in which some set of faces, vertices, and edges can be addressed as a whole. Okay? I'm trying not to use the word container because that's really more of what a collection is, but conceptually like that, but different than a container, than a collection. So there. Now they're all together. And so here I can move them around. I can Shift D them to make more of them. I could put them in, I could apply an array to them, whatever it is. And I've substantially cleaned this up. But this would not be, if I wanted this to eventually spin around and animate, this would not be the way to go about it. When you're going to join things, generally you want them to become a static whole, right? Not individual movable parts. Again, we're not animating anything individually this week, and so this may be your primary strategy this week. It's a good one, but keep that in mind as we progress throughout the semester. If you joined the tank, you wouldn't be able to spin the turret. Yes, Max?
So I guess for your example specifically, like some of the balls and squares, they have all those vertices like on the inside of the cube, but you're not going to use those. So is there a different joint where you can like cut those out?
Yeah,
Add the renders on with all like that extra stuff?
that's a really good question. Really good question. For right now, the interior, if I join stuff like this arbitrarily and there's interior geometry, that's fine for now, okay? As we go on throughout the semester, that we'll address that different ways. You don't want to have a whole bunch of stuff that we're not seeing ever. When it comes time to render, right, which is where the computation matters the most in most instances, the computer does different levels of calling, right? And so it knows that the vertices are inside, and it kind of throws them out, so it doesn't worry about that. Yeah. So in general, your intuition is correct here. Like, we're mostly concerned with the outer shell of the object, and we don't want to have a bunch of junk inside. But for this week, for moving stuff around, and unless it's a gigantic thing, this doesn't. It's not going to pose a huge problem right now. So yeah, you're exactly correct in that they have not been fused together, and so it does have internal geometry, right? All of these vertices in the sphere exist inside this cube. But when it comes time to actually render like so, the kind of like that laser we were talking about that shoots out of the camera, at render time, there's a similar sort of thing happening where the game, or this is where there's a lot of overlap between game technology and rendering technology here, is that really smart people have thought about this, and there's all sorts of systems in place that just sort of throw that stuff out before, so it doesn't waste time on stuff that you're not going to see. So yeah, the whole system is designed with that end goal in mind. We're going to end up with a picture. And so how can we get to this picture quickly enough, right? All the stuff when I'm talking about computation and rendering quickly, there's, like really brilliant people have spent a large portion of their lives optimizing that idea. And we're here in that we want it to render quickly, within seconds, ideally. But a lot of this has really benefited from video game technology, where, in a video game, we need to not render one frame in just a few seconds. We need to render, the metric is flipped. We need to render 60 frames a second, right? And so in order to achieve those kind of speeds, there's all sorts of speed up stuff that needs to happen. And a lot of that is out of your, you're not directly touching it. It's all happening behind the scenes. People have worked on that. Now, in terms of like, I want to throw those out so that now I can manipulate the outer shell. we'll get there in a couple of weeks here. We'll talk about that idea, but not today. But good question. So for right now, don't worry about that. That's not going to be our bottleneck this week in terms of what's going to be the problem, right? Inevitably, most of the time here, the bottleneck is what you ran into last week, setting the render engine to cycles instead of Eevee, right? That one checkbox results in a like 50x difference in render time, right? Whereas like this decision, whether those vertices are there, it's still computation. It may matter, but the amount at which it matters, it may be one millionth of that amount of time, right? Where it's like, yeah, it's longer. It went from 0.02 nanoseconds to 0.4 nanoseconds. And so in our context, like, who cares? I can't even tell, right? If I were to do that a billion times, well, then that would matter, right? So the good news is the computers are really fast. So we can be a little sloppy and get away with it now. Whereas like, I don't know, pick a metric. 30 years ago, people would have had to pay more attention to this because it would have mattered more. Now, we can just sort of like freewheel it to a point and it hopefully will work out in the end. So yeah, Max brings to, like he was rendering a car scene or something after class on Monday and had it set to cycles. And yeah, it didn't render any frames, or it took like 20 minutes to render one frame. 4 frames or something. And so this is where the interface falls down, is that their ability to show you what's going to really matter when it comes time to make your image. That's what my job is, I guess, is like trying to point out what's going to be important and what's not as important, right? That one drop-down menu with a bunch of inscrutable names in it ends up being way more important than this other decision here. So once you work with things more, you'll get a sense for that kind of stuff. Okay, someone else have a question? Yes.
Yeah, I'm still not sure. You have scene collection, and then you have the individual collections, and I'm maybe sort of C4D muscle memory problem, but I don't see a group, like a whole group that I can put into an array and take that group and make a vertical line and then another.
Okay, I'll get there in a second. Let me finish with the other two organizer things, and we're working our way towards that. Yeah. So what I just did, that was joining, right? Okay. The other parenting, we'll just discuss briefly here. So here's a sphere, here's a cube, okay? And so if I want to establish a relationship between this sphere and this cube, I'm going to take this cube here, and here's the way I like to do it, is I hold down Shift and drag from child onto parent. Hold Shift while dragging in the outliner. Yes, this is how I think it forces you to visually organize the hierarchy. So hold down Shift, click drag, and then come over here. I'm still holding down Shift and let go. And so now, if I unfold here under the sphere, you now see that the cube is a child of the sphere. It has been indented over here, okay? And so the sphere is the parent, the cube is the child. And so now, if I select the parent and move it around, the child comes along. But unlike joining, the cube has maintained its own identity. And so it can still be transformed, it can have keyframes, all those kind of things. Whereas like this thing over here, where I joined them all, if I unfold over here, notice that it's called cube, but that name is totally arbitrary. I could call it Bob or Joe. It doesn't matter. It's just a bunch of letters. It just adopted, I think it adopts whatever the name is of the last thing I selected in the group of things that I joined. but we'll just call this joined thing. Okay, and here, sphere, that's the parent, and this is the cube. So the important thing to realize about the parent-child relationship for now is that anything I do to the parent automatically gets transferred to the child, and so the transform, rolls downhill, goes this way. And you can extend these hierarchies as much as you would want. You can have grandparents or parent of a parent of a parent of a child. You can have multiple children under one parent. All sorts of complex hierarchies on people. This is a very complex relationship of parent, child, 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 right? The whole way down the chain in order to create these movable relationships between objects. So for this week, making these abstract scenes, it's good to know about this, but the advantage of doing it like this is that comes down to animation, right? That we were able to still access the things individually. Yes, Sean?
Can you show how you did the shift drag again?
Yeah. So here, there we go. Right. So here, let's do this. This is the child, and this is the parent. So I'm just changing the names, right? And so I select the child, hold down Shift, then I click and drag onto the parent, okay? And then let go of the mouse first. So the muscle memory there is a little tricky. Okay, the other thing you can do is select the child, then select the parent, and Control P. When you Control P for parent, it brings up this, and if I just press Enter for now, the top one, without getting into all this, there we go. We've now parented one to the other. You'll see a lot of people do it that way on different Blender tutorials using the Control P. In general, I like dragging them over here so that I can visually see the organization of what is the child and what is the parent, and that I think is helpful. But they both work, right? So you can Control P your way to that, or you can Shift drag from one to the other.
So the one that says cube and then sub cube 8, where are all the
Yeah, so
developments?
this is not another object. This is just like it's not another object. It's just like a further data container for this thing. So for right now, the stuff that's in green here, those things, just don't worry about this. This is, I don't know why it forwards it by default to such a degree in the interface. So like, there are not two things here. It's just one. This is,
No, but what I'm saying is, aren't you have like 12 different pieces in that?
Right. Not anymore. They've been joined.
They're joined.
They're
Okay,
joined.
okay,
Yeah. Not
When
anymore.
you unjoin, what's unjoin?
You can tab in and then select the individual vertices and then Control L. Like, let's not do that right now. Like, it's the whole thing, right? Because we got to go into edit mode. Everything I'm doing today is in object mode. Everything has been in object mode. We're dealing with objects, okay? In general, this week's strategy for unjoining is Control Z. Go back and join again without that thing, okay? Once we get into more edit mode next week, then we'll discuss that. But ideally, you don't want to end up, you don't want to be doing this bunch, right? Like when you're joining is more of a commitment than, is it like they're getting married? I don't know. Like they're solidly associated at that point. Yes, Sean.
How did you toggle face project on and off again? I'm sorry.
Up here. Yeah, so I'm going to go, actually, it's still on.
Magnet one, right?
Yeah, the magnet one.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So you toggle the magnet on and off, but then what you're actually turning on when you turn the magnet on, that's what this menu is controlling, right? Like, am I turning on incremental snapping or face projection snapping, right? Like, that's what we change here, and then whether or not that's on is this. Okay? Okay, so I've parented these things, I've joined those things, and now let's say I've got this thing and I want to make a bunch of these things. So here I am, and I've got my magnet on, so I'm snapping them to some sort of grid-like configuration of things. Okay, there we go. And so now I've got this, and I want to organize this all together. And let's see here. Now, now I can just click on them. Because they're joined, right? And so I don't have to make sure I'm clicking on each individual box because it's not an individual box right now. And you can right click and or over here. Yeah, and so here I want to organize these things into a collection. I right click over here in the outliner, and I can say new collection, and it didn't put them in there. I can't remember if there's a thing for that. But anyways, let's call this face things. There we go. And so now I can move all of these things into this. There. Now, again, this allows me to fold up this collection so that they're there. But the collection, like bin thing, it's really a mechanism for organizing your outliner primarily. Okay. If you click on the top of it, I think there's an add-on for this, but I don't remember off the top of my head. It certainly makes it easier to grab all of the stuff you have available here. The other thing that's useful is the decimal point, right? The delete key on the numpad. Over here, remember it's on the numpad. It's a view shortcut. And so this is an interesting one. It sort of focuses on whatever I have selected. So if I select this and then press that, the camera sort of zooms into that thing. The other interesting thing about this is if I select something here in the viewport, let's say I've got a bunch of junk over here and I've got multiple collections of things. If I come over here and press the decimal point, it will sort of open up the collection and show you exactly where that thing is in the outliner, right? And so this is another instance of the contextuality of the shortcut, is that period or decimal point zooms in when your mouse is in the viewport, but over here decimal point zooms in or highlights the object that is currently selected over here when you're in the outliner. So that is certainly useful one for moving things around.
That's why if you have a numpad.
What's that?
Is that only if you have a numpad?
I don't know if the period key does that if you check the button or not. I mean, did you?
It pulls up like a mouse drag and drop window.
Yeah, it's like a different key. So
It doesn't seem to enable in the numbers that we're checking out. It doesn't enable the decimal point to do that.
yeah, it's a different key.
It's okay.
Yeah, it may be. You can. So all the shortcuts, if.
You can map your keys.
Yeah. So where is it? Here? No, navigation. Oh, key map. Yeah. Yeah. So in key map, you can search, press, if you set this to key binding and then you type decimal point here, you could come in and change this to something else. Oh no, did I just mess mine up? Yeah, but anyways, proceed carefully there in terms of resetting all that stuff. Okay, great. So for the most part, this week, join. I would recommend you'll primarily be using join in the construction of meta objects from other objects, and then use the collection organizer in order to keep your outliner from becoming a gigantic list that is inscrutable, right? If you want to create a scene with more density to it. The parenting part of it, it's important to understand that right now, but it's not necessarily to use that a bunch this week. Everybody clear on these different strategies here? And then in terms of unjoining, yeah, just Control Z your way out of it for now. Okay. And so here, this also in the outliner as we're working our way, I guess, clockwise around the interface. That worked out. We have whether or not we want to see it in the viewport and whether or not we want to see it in the render. And so if I were to unclick, yeah, so if you do it to the collection, it does all of them. And so if I do this, they all go away. They're not deleted, they're just invisible. But if I were to Control-Alt-0, here we go. Now I'm going to render. They're there, right? Why are they there in the render? Because the camera is still active, but they're not visible in the viewport. And so if you have some sort of big scene where there's a bunch of junk, and you're like, okay, well, I need to work on this car that's in this, New York scene, and so I turn off all the, streets and buildings so I can just focus on the car. But then I want the other stuff on when it renders. Then that would be the way to organize that. And then obviously this is the other, like the client comes back and says, I like this New York scene, get rid of that car. You can just say, don't render that car and render all the other stuff. And so then we have that, the inverse of what I did previously, right? So there's that. Yeah, so a lot of times when students have something, they're like, well, I did all this work and I can see it in the viewport, but I don't see it when I render. A lot of times this is the issue. Somehow the camera icon got unselected, and that's where that's at. Okay. Good. So along those lines, let me shifty this out of here, and then if I want to move this out of this collection, we have to move it up to the other collection. So yeah, there is, by default, when you just make a new scene, there's like this top level collection, and then there's a collection below that. And so in order, these collections are nested underneath that collection. And so in order to move it out of one collection, you're into another collection. Yes, Sean?
How did you make two separate collections?
I just right-clicked over here and said new collection. Yeah,
Sorry.
in the outliner. Yeah. So again, the right-click, the most contextual of menus, right? Depending on what you're right-clicking on, it'll show you different stuff. So yeah, in the outliner. Today, I would pay attention to that. Like, is he clicking over here or is he clicking over here? That because those are two different things. In fact, and then with the shortcuts, was his mouse over here or was his mouse over here? Because that.
That'll have an effect.
Yeah. What window your mouse is over matters, right? The other one mostly being control space. Remember this one that sort of like makes this full screen? You can make this full screen too. There's a lot of unused space here, but like this one only works when the mouse is over this, the viewport there. So great. Okay. Now I've got this one out here, and I'm just going to turn this stuff off for now. Okay. How are we doing? Pretty good. Okay. Let's get rid of these lights for the time being. Let's go back to solid view. We don't need to see this parent-child for right now. I need to get this back to the center. Alt-G. Boom. There we go. And so now, okay, we've talked about grouping things together and our different strategies for doing that and why you'd want to use the different strategies. another word here, in order to get some more interface, remember this incredibly important, incredibly small little arrow up here. This is going to, if we press N, it opens up this drawer to show us all of the add-on stuff. And again, you need to have your mouse in the viewport when you press N. N as in no more. I need a good mnemonic here. No N. There's no N in drawer. Window. I don't know. I'm at a loss. Anyways, N opens up this side view over here. And so here, this is where a lot of the add-on and or extension interface gets put. So when you're watching people online or you're watching me, your options here may vary substantially from what you see those people have. And most often that's because they have an add-on or extension enabled that you do not there. And so that keep an eye out for that. And this, for the most part, like if you see something that they're doing over here that looks really cool, like notice the name, because that's usually what you would look up in order to find that extension and or add-on there. It's not true for 100% of add-ons, but for a lot of them. Great. And so I wanted to have that thing on. I don't know why that wasn't on before. What am I doing over here? Oh, I'm so over here under our tool. Okay, so this ends up being a pretty important one. Is the origin. And so this is big letters here. The anchor point is the origin in Blender. So in the Blender documentation, they'll refer to what I usually call anchor points as the origin for that object. And this may be something, depending on how you want to arrange things for your abstract scene, particularly the abstract order scene, that you'll want to manipulate the anchor point of the object, right? And so this, let me show you how this works, and I think it'll make more sense. So I'll come in here and here, there we go, from the orthographic view from the side, and I've got this selected, and the axis appears in the middle of the object because we are in local, and over here we are in median point, right? And so that's great. And so if I want to rotate this, I can rotate the object like so. That's obvious. But what if I wanted to rotate the object around this corner, as if it were a box sitting on a floor here and it was tipping this way, right? It would rotate around this corner over here. How would one accomplish that? You would have to move the anchor point, right? And so the anchor point here, again, anchor point equals origin. And so we need to N origins. And so now if I press G and move this, right? So notice I press G and the object is not moving because I am in origin mode. And now I can place the origin over here. I can get out of origin mode. Now if I press R, there we go. Now I'm rotating around that. I've moved the entire origin for the object. As I move it around, if I were to deselect it and come back and select it again, the origin, I've moved the anchor point of the object, okay? Now, I probably shouldn't have used that box flipping over example because you're like, okay, well then what if the box continued to flip? Wouldn't I have to put the anchor point over there? Yes. Then you're in a situation where like, wait, now I have multiple anchor points. Yes, that is a problem. That is a whole other day of discussion. But for right now, I want to move the anchor point of the object. Most often, this is in this format, is that here I have the anchor point by default in the middle of the primitive. But let's say I'm making that this is a chair, right? And we want it to sit on the floor. Well, here's a floor. Let's go ahead and make a plane. I'll scale this plane up. There we go. We got floor. Now I come back and grab this, look at it from the side. I could move this up, but I moved it up, and visually that looks okay. It's sitting on the floor, right? But if I were to grab this object and then zero it out again, Alt-G, boom, it moves it so it's gone through the floor again. And so this is a lot of what you'll be doing here at the beginning, is that you want the anchor point for objects that sit on the floor. Ideally, you want the anchor point to be in the middle at the bottom, right? So that when you zero them out, they sit on the floor. And so here, I'll come back to this one. I'll come back and say origins, and then move this down. Moving it directly to the bottom here is easy because this cube was a standard size, and I have the snapping on for right now, and so it snaps directly to the bottom. Now, the thing is, this is a toggle, meaning like while it's on, my rotate and my move are going to affect the origin. Because so this is important. Like in After Effects or in Photoshop to some extent, like the origin is just a point. When you're moving it around here, that translates, that makes sense. But here, the origin also has orientation, right? And so you can have the origin point in a different direction. That's usually a new consideration. So keep that in mind. But also, this is a toggle, and it's one of those toggles that's very easy to leave on and forget that it's on, because you can check that and then close this drawer, and now, you know, end up in a situation where you're like, okay, I'm going to grab this thing and hit. You're like, I can't move any of my objects because I'm still in the origin mode, and I need to exit that, and now I can come back and I can move my objects and everything. So that's something to keep in mind there. And so now I'm going to select this thing. Now I've moved the origin to the center bottom. And so now if I were to grab this and Alt-G it, boom, it sits directly on the floor plane there. So now if I were to change my snapping back to face project and then Shift D this and then scale it down and then come over here. Yeah. And so on the top here, if I do this, see as I'm moving it around, see how it sort of pops up to be on top of those things? It's because this face project, it's not project, it doesn't, it's just placing the origin on the exact place where that laser beam contacts something, some piece of geometry, okay? The thing that you're placing there, it doesn't care about the shape of that. It just cares about that origin point. I'm going to put that origin exactly at that position that the laser hit coming from the camera. And so there we see that that's now directly on pot. If I were to Shift D this again, there we go. But if I were to Shift D it over to the other side, well, wait a minute. Why is this still in there? It's because the origin point is in the center here, and so it still puts half of it when you're looking at it from the side inside the thing. Okay, so, but I mean, you could fix that yourself by just doing this, right? When I'm rotating things, I'm almost always holding down Control, because that allows me to snap to regular increments to like rotate something exactly 90 degrees. You know, most of the time I'm doing, especially for mechanical-ish kind of things, I'm doing that kind of stuff. Okay, so now I've got those three things, and I like that, and I want this to become a thing, and so I grab those, and then, again, Control-J. Make sure I just have these. Do I have them? Yes. Don't have origins on. Control. Why am I not selecting that? There. There we go. And so now this is a meta face thing. There we go. And now I could Shift D that. And then as a general, like I've just smushed objects into objects into objects here. In general, in terms of efficiency, many vertices is faster than many objects. So in this instance, right, where I've got the cube and there's all those spheres and then more cubes and then I smushed them into an object and smushed them into an object, having one object with like literally millions of vertices, the computer should eat that up. No problem. You should be able to move around quickly and do that. Having one object that has two vertices in it and duplicating it 5 million times, that's going to be slow because of the way the computation is happening behind the scenes. Okay, it's important to write this down and think about this going forward. You're not going to run into this too much this week, right? Because we really have to be cranking the numbers here for this to matter, and so but keep that in mind. Yes, someone was asking. Yeah.
If you like select a collection or a grouping of items, right? Like if you want to like mirror flip it, if that makes sense, when you copy it, like you shift E and then you go to move it and you want to like mirror it right next to itself. Is there a way to do that with like a few clicks, or do you have to like, or maybe a keyboard command, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll look at the mirror modifier here in a second when we talk about the array modifier.
Okay.
Yeah, that's coming up.
I keep putting the card.
You're pulling us forward through the lecture. That's good. Okay.
Quick question about
Yes.
selecting. So if I select a collection in the outliner, and that layer, the collection layer, is highlighted, it doesn't enable the viewport. Right. So in other words, if I'm from a viewport and I make a selection, then I hit G, I can move that selection. But if I go over to the outliner and hit the word collection and go to the viewport and hit G, nothing happens. So the outliner does not enable like the way Photoshop would, for example. When you click on a layer, you're doing something to that layer. So in the outliner here, if I click on the whole collection, it does not enable me to do the whole collection. Does that make sense?
Yeah. If these are on.
Because
Right,
I would have to
yeah.
do a wireframe to see that I have
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, the collection is not like a parent, right? You have to select the stuff here. Now, if I press G, I'm moving all of those. Yeah. So, like, it's really like a drawer just for you to organize your thoughts. It's not as functional as like a parent thing is. I mean, you can move them all underneath a parent, right? So if I took all of these and this would be an argument for parenting this week, is now if I select this and move it, the rest of them come there, right? So, but I still have access to them. If I want to come over here and move this one and then come back up to this one and then move them all and then it stays relative to those, right? So there's an argument for parenting if this week, if I wanted to just be able to individually place them as it's going. But yeah, the collection it's not a manipulation tool. It's mostly an organizational tool. Okay. We did origins. We did a bunch of this stuff here. Okay, let's move. Yeah, I think we've covered what I wanted to say about objects. I think we're doing pretty good. Just to reiterate, something has happened and your interface no longer looks like usual. And even if you go over to some other interface, then come back to layout, things are still messed up. Hit plus and create a new layout interface, and that should be the default. And so you can restore order to the world in that way, which should be useful if things go way off the rails there. Let's make sure we're saving. Let's look at the save window. Yeah, and so now, right, I've got 3 backups there that has been making every, whatever I told it, 2 minutes or something, right? And again, these don't look like they're actually Blender files because they've got this 1 or whatever the number is afterwards. In order to open up a backup in Blender, you need to, most of the time, move it to a different folder, then get rid of the number. Everybody understand that? That's a fundamental computing thing. If you write this down, cannot have 2 files named the same right. This is general computing. No, but as far as I know, no operating system will allow this, right? Because think about it, like what the name of the file is how the computer identifies the file, right? And if they both have the same name in the same folder, then that's not allowed, okay? And so now you can have 2 files with the same name in different folders, okay? But as a general practice, that's not a smart thing to do because that's going to cause you confusion. The computer will allow it because they're in different locations. But this is an issue. Where this comes up often is in the download something twice. When you do that, your computer automatically puts the number 1 the second time you download it, right? Because it's all going into the downloads folder, and it can't put 2 files named the same thing in the same folder, okay? So keep that in mind. If you do want to, the way it applies to us right now is that if we want to open up that backup Blender file, we need to move it out of that folder because there's already a blend file with that name in the folder, right? So keep that in mind. Just a general computing thing that people kind of intuitively understand but may not have been explicitly laid out for you. Well, there it is. I just explicitly laid it out for you. Okay, so let's move up our chain from atomic level to object level. Now we'll take that next step up to modifiers. And essentially some sort of way to manipulate objects or geometry of objects. And the modifier tab is the wrench. We're going to focus on the array one again a little bit more, and then we'll look at the mirror one. Those would be 2 useful ones. Okay, now, so we'll come back to here. Now, instead of making an array of random spheres, we're going to make an array of this thing. So I've got some sort of object with multiple things together, and now I want to create an array of it. In this case, you must join, okay? You can't, using the child parent is not going to be useful because we cannot apply a modifier to the whole hierarchy. It's applied to a single object here, okay? So keep that in mind. Come over here to the modifier wrench tab right here. And yeah, I never really search for click around in this menu. I just type the name of the modifier in, and so that ends up being a little bit faster. So we'll dial up the array, and you want to be careful to use the array and not the array legacy. And you want to make sure you're on Blender 5+, because the array changed substantially in 5, right? 5.1, 5.2, whatever you're on, that'll be the same, but it would change substantially in 5. Okay, and so here we go, the array. So I really glossed over this last time. Let's look at this a little bit more detail. So yeah, the shape in which we want to create multiples, right? And how much space do we want in between these things, right? So if I were to make some sort of more stair-steppy kind of arrangement here. The good news is, well, I mean, everything's a trade-off, and this is no exception, is that this can be very powerful for making these very large arrays of stuff, but it's not copying the data. How the data is stored in the computer matters, is the short story, okay? And so if you use the array modifier, in general, you're doing it the fast way. We'll come to the different ways here in a second. But we should be able to do relatively large things here. So for instance, I had something like this. These are also stackable, right? So if I came up with another array here, now I can copy the copy to some extent, or to a bunch. Now you're congratulations. You're leveraging the power of computation, right? In that, like, you can create these large emergent patterns, right? But this is, my favorite superhero is Spider-Man. I grew up reading all the Spider-Man stuff. Spider-Man's, my favorite. Right, the Spider-Man guiding principle, right? And so now you have been gifted with superpowers of computation, and you should use them responsibly. And so up until now, right, you could duplicate things with Shift-D, but you could Shift-D your brains out, and it would be hard to get to a point that you were testing your hardware. Now that I've opened the door to the array modifier for you, now this starts to matter, right? Because just in those 2 steps here, right, we can get into what's referred to as exponential growth, right? And so, this is both the blessing and the curse of modern life here, in that we all now have the power of exponential growth in a variety of facets of our life, and it turns out all of us using them at the same time can present some problems on a variety of fronts, right? And so now we've got this situation where we've got 24 times 16 objects, and so just by coming in here, especially because the interface makes this number it's just a number there. It's just a box I can crank one way or the other. Is that you can easily crank it to a point where now things are going to slow down a little bit in the computer, or maybe crash, right? If we add a third one here, right? Now we're not taking one step forward exponentially, or in terms of magnitude, we're taking a multiple step forward in magnitude. So again, think about this. It's fun to experiment with a bunch of things, but this is where you can definitely get into some issues doing this type of thing. Let me see. Let's save. And then if I were to crank this up like that and come back over here, there we go. And now if I were to I don't know if it's gonna. Do we see some sort of version here? If I do this, or no? Okay, I guess we need to address duplication here. Okay, when I have modifiers in the second, this one here, this little computer, we turn that off, so it turns off that modifier, and so we can come back to it. Let me do this, and data matters when we start talking about this, and it comes down to this issue individually. Up until now, we've done duplicating, which is Shift D. And this essentially duplicates the data in memory. It is a completely new and separate thing. This is in contrast to instance, which is Alt D, and this is what we'll refer to as a smart copy. And so references a single instance of the data. And so here, the important thing to remember is that this is not only faster because you're not duplicating all of the data in the computer, but this is the important one. You change one, they all change. So this is an important creation strategy to keep in mind. So duplicating up until now is very conceptually clear. I duplicated it, now I have this one and I have that one. They are separate things. I can manipulate one and can manipulate the other. I don't need to explain that to anyone. Instance, okay, is that we have duplicated, it looks like there's a duplicate on the screen, but both of these visual representations are referencing the same group of data inside the computer. And so that results in these two important ramifications. One is it's fast, really fast, orders of magnitude faster, in that the computer doesn't need to like read the memory for all of the things and then show you the stuff. It just reads it once and then just kind of like does it multiple times on the screen. That's very fast. And then also, it is one single piece of data. And so if that's manipulated, all of the instances, all of the places where that data is instantiated change. So, yeah. Here, how are we going to do this? Shift D. And so now if I grab this one and scale it, it's separate. Let's grab this one and Alt D. There we go. Move it over. And if I scale this one, we have the instance can have separate scale information, but I'm going to tab in here and sort of show this, grab this part and press G. And look what's happening.
But that won't happen if you did it on the Shift D one, right?
It has not. This object remains unchanged. So over here, don't do what I'm doing right now. This is awful, right? It looks terrible. But I'm just demonstrating, right? So these are instances, right? And so here, again, Alt D over here, Tab, manipulate some of the fundamental data, and they all change. Okay, so again, this is useful. I'm making a forest, right? This is probably the easiest example, right? And I want to have a tree in this forest. If I Alt D the forest, and the client comes back and is like, I like it, but this bottom branch on the tree is bothering me. Can we get rid of that? If you already made the whole forest at that point, it's going to be some doing to get rid of that branch on all of the trees. If they're all instances, I simply delete the branch on one of the trees, and it's gone on all of the trees. So, and this is also number 2 on our reasons to use instances is they're fast. And so making a forest would definitely be an instance situation because you're going to have the trees tend to be very high density objects. And so if you're going to have a bunch of them, you could definitely start to slow down your computer in like a substantial way by duplicating 1,000 trees versus instancing 1,000 trees. So in general, Blender will be clear. It'll use the word instance when it's an instance. And so when you're using the array modifier, that's a little bit of what this object, this checkbox is telling you. Which of these things does it actually have the thing on? This one? This one? I totally forget now. Right, I put the array modifier back on this one. Realize instances. And this is convert instance to duplicate. And so when this is checked, the array modifier will be in quote unquote slow mode. It's making whatever shape you asked and then converting them into something that's more like duplicates. If you uncheck this box, then you are in fast mode. Okay. Now, if you're just using one array modifier, definitely the strategy is to uncheck this box because it'll be quick. If you're stacking the modifiers, right? Because this is now where you really start to see the matrix is when the modifier, now like multiple modifiers. Oh, okay. Now I see what we're doing. But once you start doing that, then the data that gets sent from modifier to modifier starts to matter. There can be more complex situations. And so that's an instance where you may need this checked. But if you're just using it once, unchecking the box is fine. Yes?
What's the reason for where it says to modifier to disable the first one? Like, why would you be doing that? I don't remember where I saw that. Maybe it'll ask you whether or not you want to include. Oh, maybe it's in the randomize. Yeah, randomize. So it'll say enable first, disable. Why do you want to do that or not?
Oh, I think that's like an ArtDirect thing, right? So if we do this, or actually this, right? And so if I did a bunch of these like so, yeah. And so, so here, whether or not we move the first one. And so in a lot of, from just a art making perspective, right? This, again, right, as we move up that chain, atomic, object, modifier, right? We can do more powerful stuff, but our specific control over the things becomes in some ways less. But this is Blender helping you out in that a lot of times there's issues where like I want to build this thing on top of this area, and I want to be able to control this area like right here, not randomly in the zone right there, right? And so that's all that's doing is saying like keep the first one exactly where I put it, and then do all the other junk on top of that. Okay, but if that's unchecked, then it randomizes all of them. Right.
Question though. So what started happening with me was, look, I know that it's clipping, I know what was happening. It was like I was creating a thing that was apparently much bigger than I thought, and I went to this clipping of the viewport. I just couldn't get it. I could get it only within a certain tiny bit of scroll zoom, but I had it set at like 4,000 meters, and I could see part of it, and then dialing down to 0.001. I just, the clipping was a big problem. So, that was happening with Array, because randomized at Array, because it started to put things way out in space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there a clipping? Is there a default that maybe if you're doing
Okay.
buildings or architecture as opposed to small?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is 1,000. The default is 1,000 meters. So that's just if you made something that was building sized, then your building is already 1,000 meters tall. So yeah, you would be way out of that zone, right? Okay, so let me explain clipping first. Okay, so back running into issues with view clipping. How far can you see? Why not just be able to see the entire scene? The answer, anytime we end up in a situation like this, it's almost always because that'd be a lot of computation, right? And so there is viewport clipping. There's also camera clipping for the render. So there's separate, again, there's the viewport settings, and then there's the camera clipping settings. And essentially this is related to what Max brought up earlier with the internal stuff. And I said the computer was throwing that out, right? In that case, the term is culling, C-U-L-L-I-N-G. But in this case, it's clipping. Things that are really, really far away, we're just going to, for the time being, delete them for this frame so we don't have to spend energy rendering them. So this matters. And so the settings here are in the view tab in the N menu or N drawer. And usually the way this happens is if you made a big thing, then you can't see it because it's now bigger than the clipping, and so you need to expand the clipping setting. So let me just turn this off and do it with some other object. So here's a cube. There we go. Turn this off for now. When is this thing? Yeah, turn that off. Okay, there we go. Cube. And so our default cube here, this allows us to talk about scale. Okay, so over here, our default cube is 2 meters. Okay. What's that?
How'd you get that?
I clicked on the this one object.
The orange one?
Yeah, the orange one. So 2 meters. First of all, how big is a meter?
Like 3.5 feet?
Yeah. Okay, so 3 feet-ish, right? Like the imperial equivalent is yard-ish, right? So here, right? So I'm 6 feet tall, neighborhood of 2 meters, okay? So especially in this, my first assignment to you, make this abstract stuff, you're probably not thinking a lot about how many meters this is. But this does start to matter when we talk about clipping and then also some other things later on. And so this is 2 meters. And so this cube, if you scanned me and put me in there at scale, I'd be about as tall as this cube here, right? Now, if everything was to scale, right? If everything was to scale. But over here, look at this. The scale, put this in big capital letters on your notes. Relative. This scale number here is not meters. This is relative scale, right? It's 1. This is 1 cube, big, however that cube is. If I want to make a cube that's twice as big, I come over here and I write 2, 2, 2, right? Just hit a tab to go from the next one, right? And now this cube is twice as big as this cube. It is relative measurement to that object, okay? Each object, the scale information is stored as this relative multiplier, okay? So this becomes very important. With that in mind, let's say I want to make this, I'm going to make another new cube here, and I want it to be the size of a building. And so I'm going to say it's 20 meters. Okay, and so now, like, okay. But the problem here is that it's very easy to scroll your wheel and look at it like this, and like, okay, well, that looks visually, especially because there's no other stuff in the scene. That looks visually indistinguishable from the 2 meter cube, right? But I'm 10x as big here. And so now, if I were to put the array modifier on this, there we go, and in this direction, there we go, like that, and then start to multiply this. Let's look up in this direction. There we go. And so here, see what happened there? As I dial the number of cubes going up here, they're each 20 meters tall, and it takes me, exactly 40 cubes. See how it stops expanding, right? It didn't stop expanding. It's just I've gone beyond my clipping threshold here, where it starts cutting stuff off. And so if I were to make, boom, now I can see it goes, not that one, there we go. I can continue to extend it into, the stratosphere, wherever it's going there. Right. Now, it's important to realize that this is the viewport clipping. And then in the camera itself, under, I often,
It's up, says end. It's like in the middle of it, like right above depth of field.
oh yeah, there it is. Or you can come up here to search and type clip, and then it shows you that right there, right? So you're young and can remember things like Mark, then you just know where it is. You're old and you can't remember a darn thing anymore, then you can search and it'll highlight the parameter over here, especially for some of the windows in Blender where there's like a lot of parameters. I end up doing that a bunch. The thing that you need to also then remember to do is delete this so that then it goes back so it's not showing the other thing. And so
I don't have a camera button on that.
you might not have the camera selected.
No, I mean, on the bottom half of that, you have the little green camera button right there.
Yeah, because I have the do you have the camera selected?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, remember the green one is contextual, okay? When you select a light, it's going to show you stuff for the light. If you select the mesh, it's going to show you stuff for the mesh. Yeah, so you have to have it selected. So I'm going to move the camera here. And then render, and I get nothing. And come back here and start to expand this. There we go. Right. So the viewport clipping was the default was less than 100 meters, right? And so now I start dragging that up, and there it's like, okay, now I can see the scene. And so now when I render, there I see something. There's not enough light in the scene or whatever, but it's there. So yeah, this, besides the object, the camera just having moved into the void somewhere, this is the other thing that people run into often at the beginning, where it's like, what happened? Where's my stuff, right? Because it's, the good news is that when you're making stuff virtually like this, we can really play with scale in like a really interesting way. in very playful way. Whereas in real life, if you want to make things that are 10x bigger, that presents like a lot of problems in terms of like budget and other stuff, right? And so, yeah, we can really play with a lot of it here in that instance. So viewport clipping, right? So in your case, expanding both this numbers. Keep that one the same, but the second one needed to be bigger, right? So a little bit of metric here. 1 meter equals 3 feet-ish. Then 1,000 meters equals 1 kilometer, right? That's the metric prefix kilo is 1,000, right? So that's less than a mile-ish. And yeah, 0.1 meter equals 1 centimeter. You can change the fundamental unit of measurement for Blender in the preferences. I wouldn't do that this week. Okay, I've done it occasionally, like if I'm doing something I know needs to be fabricated in America, then it makes it a little bit easier. But you can also do this. If I wanted to, let's get rid of this for the second. Come back down to here. Get rid of that. Delete that. Shift A. Cube. Right. So here's the default cube of 2 meters, and now it's like tiny. That decimal point, super useful for zooming back in. Right. So selecting an object and pressing the decimal point, a really good navigational tool, because it's very easy to end up in the stratosphere where you essentially have launched yourself into orbit and can no longer see the things on the ground, or you can easily become Ant-Man here and like dial yourself into the the metaverse here, the quantum realm, and never like now everything is gigantic and I'm looking at ants or less than ants there. And so again, with something selected and pressing the period key allows me to return to some sort of normal perspective on the thing, right? So again, the good news is you can look anywhere. The bad news is you can very easily get lost with all this stuff. Great. Okay, the one other thing here, we got about 15 minutes. So let's do, the array. So as people played with the array this weekend, right, the randomization thing here, shapes. I heard Kevin asking about the shapes. So, right, so here would be a use case for multiple arrays. Let's put them in circle. Let's expand the radius. Let's expand the number like so. And then let's say I wanted to make a tube shape out of this. And so another array here. And so the second array I could put into line. I'm going to organize it on the Z like so. And so then I could create, that kind of shape there.
The higher stack, did you just increase the amount?
I increase the amount on the second array modifier, right? And I know that this is something I want to use a bunch. If I'm going to use it, if I'm then going to duplicate this and move it around, I'm going to uncheck these boxes so that it's super quick. And now I could Shift D it around to make a bunch of them, and then maybe click on one, and this one's a little bit taller, and this one's a little bit shorter, and this one's a little bit wider, or wider this way, and a little bit like this, and now I could move this around and do one of these, and because I've got them in fast mode, I'm able to move stuff around, and then I want to start playing with the the chaos one, and so now I want to start thinking about randomization up here, and so I could start doing things like like this to start to randomize things. And then what if I added an additional level of randomization on the second level of this, perhaps with rotation, right? So we're adding randomization to the rotation of each ring, but each ring itself maintains its general look and feel, right? Something like this. Yeah. Yes.
I lost my train of thought. I
I
apologize.
have one. I know you were doing that, the duplication and then, the instance.
Yes.
Duplication.
Yes.
I was messing around over here and I added a cone.
Yes.
And it added a cone for every one of those, copies, you know, so I had like 3 copies
Mm-hmm.
that I screwed around with them, messing around, and they all meshed.
Mhm.
And I added cone, and it added 3 arrays of cones.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good.
I thought that was kinda cool, but it,
Right.
but
Right.
I
Right.
don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I liked it.
There'll be a lot of those kind of experiences, like here at the beginning, where hopefully it's like, oh, I didn't expect that, and it's super cool. But unfortunately, a lot of times it's like, oh, I didn't expect that, and that looks awful. And so both sides of it there. So that you're sort of the issue here comes down to modes. Okay, so the cube. Let's look at the cube here, right? And so if I notice I am in object mode, okay, and here is the cube, and I make a new, Shift A and make a new sphere. There we go. And I'm in object mode, and so it has made a new object. Before I had the discrete cube, then I have the cube and the sphere. If I have the cube selected and I tab into edit mode, okay, I can still add, it looks the same here. I can add something else like a cone and then G, bring that up. But check it out. There is not a second object here, okay? When I am in edit mode, I'm editing this object. And so I can add other primitive shapes as just a lump of vertices, faces, and edges to the same object, in which case they would get instanced to all of the other instances there, right? So now, here, I'll do what I think Kevin ran into here. What's that?
It became one.
Yeah. You're adding it to the object itself, not as a separate object, right? And so now, if I Alt-D this thing a bunch, then come into this one, tab into edit mode, Shift-A, and make a cylinder, and then move that. You see that has been, it's getting all distorted because I'm still in this snapping mode.
When I did it.
Yep. So yeah, this,
I see that now.
a lot of attention to this up here.
Yeah.
It would be useful if this changed the color of the interface. I'll think about that. So that it would be clear, because you can do that in Unity, and we do that in APC 200, where there's a similar situation. Okay, good. Yes, that comes up because people are pressing Shift A, but not necessarily aware of what mode they're in. Almost everything I've been demonstrating up until just this very instance, I've been Shift Aing in object mode, where I'm making a new object, not adding other objects to the same object. Yes.
So I don't see cone anywhere in your outlier. Where is the cone? It's called a cube? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, because I added it in edit mode.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in edit mode, I have moved down the ladder to the atomic level, where I'm dealing with points, edges, and faces. And so when I Shift A here, right, like it'd be better if the Shift A menu was a little bit different, but it looks very similar. I'm essentially adding a cube arrangement of vertices to this object I'm already in. I'm not adding a separate cube object. If I want to add a separate cube object, I make sure I need to be in object mode, then I Shift A, right? You can tell because the Shift A menu looks different in object mode. There'll be a bunch of other junk here, right? And so if you're getting that very abbreviated Shift A menu, you're in edit mode, okay? So again, the mode, very mission critical here at the beginning. Okay, so now a few words yeah, about rendering. So let's come over to render mode. I can Shift A and make a point light. I can move this around. If it's not really lighting my scene because my scene is perhaps very big, I can come over here and change the power of this light. I can also tint it, although from an artistic perspective, I would be conservative with the tinting. It looks really hokey for the most part when you really lay on this tinting of the light. You can choose to have shadows or not have shadows for a light, which is an interesting thing that isn't really available to us in the real world. You can't just opt out of shadows in reality, but here we can. And then, again, a lot of it, the rendering, is figuring out what view we want to be looking at here. And then when we press F12, we're able to see that view. I think this, this is an instance where, why would that look different? Because there's a bunch of stuff I'm not seeing in the viewport that is there. I'm going to make sure I don't see those in the render either, so that now when I F12, I'm able to see this. And then this is great. When I press F12, it's rendered it. What do I do here? Image, save as, and now I can save this as a picture. So this is my abstract render chaos and save. And now if I were to look at that part of the, look in that folder, there it is. It is a PNG file. Double click. And here we are. There we go. I have rendered an image. Okay. For those of you who have used Blender before, and if you're using it for the first time, it'll be defaulting to, here's the render settings tab. We want to be using EV, not cycles this week. Okay. There's multiple classes of content about this part of it. For right now, EV, right? Should mean that when you press F12, it shouldn't be a big wait to see the image, right? It's happening like instantaneously right now. It's important to realize that that is not always the case. That F12 see an image may take much, much longer depending on, a bunch of other stuff there. But we're able to see that. Let's add some material here to this, right? So this is all one object. And so here, the material, important thing to write down, you will, materials, lights, cameras, all should be done in the render preview. View. Which I am in. And so now down here, so material, now I can color this object. For the time being, this is a limitation. Each object has a single color. We'll obviously be able to greatly expand on this later, but for this week, this is a limitation, okay? So if you want some things to have two different colors, they need to be separate objects for now, okay? And so when I apply a new material, which is, I'm in the material tab, I need to make sure I have a mesh selected. So I say new material, there we go. And wait, take a second. Hopefully I just need to crash it. Who knows? We'll see. There we go. All right. And so here, there's a lot to talk about here. Here's the short version. One, I'm going to call this blue because that'll be the main thing we're focusing on right now is just the color of it. And then under base color, I can change it to blue, something like that. Okay. And now, another thing to keep in mind, you can add the same material to multiple objects. Okay, so if you want a bunch of objects to be blue, you don't need to make a new blue material for each object. You can simply add the same one, right? So if I make a new object here of some kind, this cylinder, and I move that, and I want this to be blue, I merely select it, and then here, I can select the blue one I already made, and now this one is blue. If I want this to be red, I need to get rid of it, make another new one, call this red, change it to red, and now I have a red one. If I were to Shift D this, okay, and then this is another issue. The material, this is just like I was talking about before with the HTML and the CSS. The mesh is separate from the styling or the visual presentation of that mesh. And so if I take red and I change it to, watch this, green, all of the red changed to green. Why is that the case? These are not, your answer to that may be like, well, you made instances, right? No, these are duplicates. Why did the color change for all of them? Because it's a separate material. Is that what you're going to say? Yeah, the same material was applied to all of the objects, regardless of whether they're instances or copies or duplicates, right? So if I made it a Costosphere here, and this one also got the red, which is now confusingly green, right? And I changed it back to red. All of those objects are red because they have the same material on them. This is the same as any other 3D program that you may have worked with. But so this idea that the material is separate. This may seem like a uncomfortable, irritating amount of abstraction at first, but it's really necessary in order to do anything more complex without it really becoming an issue. So cool. Okay, we're able to make an image. We're able to save our work. We're able to back up our work. I think everyone's got a good idea of how to organize and manipulate objects in space. So yeah, we're good here. This is all going up. And so yeah, if you want to use some of this information in what's due tomorrow, feel free, right? But you don't have to, right? Technically, what's due tomorrow was based on last week's lecture. We'll have a little bit more overlap this week just because this is the second time we've seen each other. So keep that in mind. Good? Okay, all right, and we're done. Okay, stop stream.